Hi all, welcome to my research presentation for my botany class. This will be about the pollination ecology of pomegranate flowers. So looking into the different pollinators that pomegranate trees attract. Some background on pomegranates. They have tubular flowers which have sweet fruit inside. The sweet fruit, along with the shape of the flower, attract a different variety of pollinators, each playing a key role in successful fruit development, as we know that pollination is an important part of a plant's life. It'll be very interesting to look into all pollinators that the pomegranate tree attracts, but in this video we're going to primarily focus on hummingbirds and bees. So moving along, we can ask ourselves, why would we find a subject like this interesting? It's very interesting to look at the evolution of the pomegranate flower and the fruit, and the way the tubular shape suggests that it would be pollinated by birds. However, in my research, I found that insect pollination is what primarily pollinates the tree. We're going to be looking at which pollinators are actually most attracted to the flowers in an urban environment. So my question that we'll be following is, will the flowers of my chosen pomegranate tree attract more bees or more hummingbirds? We'll be moving along to find out. However, another interesting part of this is their vibrant color, and viewing that with along their sweet scent. I do believe that we'll find many different insects and hopefully many different birds that visit the pomegranate tree. So some more background on the pomegranate tree. The scientific name is the Punica granatum, belonging to the family Lythraceae. It's a dicot plant, which can be expected as it's tall, a tree. Its leaves are simple, glossy, narrow leaves that are arranged in opposite or in whorls. The flowers are bright orange-red tubular flowers that are large, very showy, attracting a lot of attention. Their fruits are rounded, thick-skinned berries filled with juicy seeds that are very delicious to humans, animals, plants alike. Their pollinators that we know of, or just a few to list, are honeybees, native bees, butterflies, hummingbirds. Herbivores that may eat or prey on the species, aphids, caterpillars, insects, but we do see that once the fruits drop, an array of different animals will eat the fruit from the tree. Its strategy in seed dispersal, like I said, animals eating the fruits and dispersing the seeds through their feces. Very interesting. Very interesting, as living in an urban area, you can imagine there would be too many animals that would be consuming the fruits from the seeds, other than humans, dogs, or possibly rabbits, coyotes, and birds. It's native to North America and has been cultivated, so it's not invasive, but its origin is Iran and India, has spread throughout the Mediterranean. We see this in so many different plants in America. However, it is native, so maybe it was brought over by ships. So in order to conduct my experiment, I needed to come up with a procedure that would allow me an adequate amount of time to look at the tree and see which pollinators visit, as well at different times of the day, to make sure I'm not missing a peak hour or a peak moment where there would be more bees or hummingbirds present. So I observed just one tree with many different flowers for 6 consecutive days, daily 30 minutes in the AM, 30 minutes in the PM, recording the number of visits of bees and hummingbirds, and noting other pollinators that were in the area. I tried to keep the location and the distance from the tree all consistent, and the time that I visited, just to ignore possible variables that may inflict with the results. There also could have been different environmental conditions that could have been a problem for the experiment, but luckily I didn't run into anything like that, and the weather was pretty consistent. So I hypothesized that the flowers of my tree would attract more hummingbirds than bees just because of the shape of the flower and its color and its attraction, how it evolved to be mostly pollinated by birds. Hummingbirds being attracted to their flower because the color, the nectar, and the shape of the tube, which is designed for birds. I did expect to see more hummingbirds. I think I also wanted to see more hummingbirds as they're so beautiful and elegant to look at, while bees are something that we see so often yet incredibly important to the pollination of a species. There were different variables involved in this experiment that I had to keep in mind. The independent variable being the one that was going to stay the same, the one that I was looking at, which is the pollinator type, either the bees or the hummingbirds visiting our chosen tree. Dependent variable is the number of visits. Controlled variables, as I gotten into, was the same time, same tree, same spot, along with things I couldn't control. Here you can see just some photos of me that I included at my chosen tree, along with the flowers and the location, just to give us some of an idea of what we're working with and talking about today. I tried including multiple different days so we could see the different way the light or the flowers captured in photo. As you can see, there are some flowers larger than others, some that are smaller, and we can even see some of the fruit that is much harder than the flowers. So now I'll begin to look at my findings. I started this project or experiment on May 23rd, looking in the AM and the PM. I won't go over each individual detail or each individual number that we did see, but as you can see, there was a trend of definitely seeing more bees than the amount of hummingbirds that we saw. Over the period, bees clearly dominated. The highest account that I did see was 16 visits. I think there was some bees I must have missed as they are much smaller and the tree is so large I couldn't look at each individual bee visiting. And hummingbirds were quite rare. I never saw more than one in a single session. And I did find that in the mornings, the bees had more activity compared to the afternoons, while the hummingbird visits were pretty sporadic. I don't think that they are primary pollinators of this tree, at least in this specific location. Of course, there could be many other details that came into play here, or variables, such as possibly a nearby hummingbird resting spot would have increased the amount of hummingbirds, or possible disturbances in the area from dogs or people or construction. Hummingbirds would be much more likely to flee. The amount of bees also differs, like I said, as I wouldn't be able to capture every single bee visiting the tree, so I chose to focus on half of the tree and just capture every bee that came into the area. So on this slide, we can see a graph here, or a chart, that you can clearly see the different visits, marking the AM bees versus the PM bees and AM hummingbirds versus the PM hummingbirds. Like I said before, there wasn't much difference in the AM versus the PM for the hummingbirds, but in the morning the bees seemed to be much more active. So in conclusion, the most frequent visitors were the bees throughout the 6-day period, definitely supporting the hypothesis that flowers attract more insect pollinators, specifically bees, rather than hummingbirds, which was not my projected outcome or my hope for this experiment. However, it is what I expected to happen rather than what I hoped for. The traits of the flower, their bright color, the accessible nectar, and the flower shape, are well suited to attracting bees, which are very efficient at pollinating these type of flowers, even though their shape was more indicative of something being pollinated by birds. It's clearly very possible that bees are just the more efficient pollinator for this type of tree. The behavioral patterns of bees, including their preference for morning foraging, align exactly with the higher bees that we saw observed in the morning sessions. And hummingbirds, which often prefer tubular flowers with more concentrated nectar, may find pomegranate flowers less attractive. It's very possible that it may not be a plant, even though it looks as if it would be pollinated by birds, that hummingbirds would not go to. My findings highlight the importance of traits and pollinator behavior in shaping the dynamics of pollination, reinforcing that insect pollination, like bees, do play a critical role in the reproduction of pomegranate trees in this specific environment. Moving right along here, this study highlights the vital role that insect pollinators, bees in particular, in my certain experiment, play in the pollination ecology of pomegranate trees. Pollination is a critical ecosystem service that supports plant reproduction, genetic diversity, and ultimately food production. Confirming bees are the dominant pollinators for this species, the study reinforces broader findings that many fruit crops depend heavily on native and managed bee populations. My results emphasize flower traits and pollinator behavior interact to shape pollination networks. The morphology and nectar accessibility of pomegranate flowers favor bee visitation. Hummingbirds may be less important in this specific environment. This dynamic illustrates how different plants may specialize or rely more heavily on specific pollinators. And overall, the study underscores the need to protect and conserve bee populations to maintain effective pollination and sustain agricultural productivity. Factors that threaten bees, such as habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change, could disrupt these critical relationships that, as we see all around us, that I found in this experiment, the park right next to my house, there was an active and living ecosystem. One where bees were the main pollinator that need to be protected and supported in this environment. These findings are not to say that hummingbirds are not in the area or are not possible efficient pollinators of other trees. I've noticed many other tubular flowers in my area where I have seen hummingbirds pollinating and hope to see many in this experiment, but this wasn't the result here. Looking overall and in hindsight, there are many revisions that I could have taken or done in this procedure. Definitely, I would have preferred to observe it over a longer period of time, possibly being able to capture the changes in the weather and the environment, and possibly if hummingbirds are moving in and out of the area. I think having a video or a trap where I would have been able to view the tree for longer periods of time without having to be there in person would have been a little bit more convenient, as I wouldn't have also been part of the disturbances in the area. That moves right along into being disturbed by dogs and humans, construction, loud noises. I could have also done more research on hummingbird activity and figured out what were their most recent hours, just to get just to maybe even watch those hours or view the peak hours of bees and then view the peak hours of hummingbirds rather than the same time every day. While conducting my experiment, I thought of many different future research ideas along the same guidelines, comparing fruit yields from flowers visited by different pollinators, seeing which pollinators led to the most fruit yield, or exploring different flower colors and species with similar structures, or maybe watching which animals actually eat the fruit from the tree other than humans. What I was saying earlier, in an urban environment, who knows what animals are feeding on these fruits and then leading to the dispersal of the seeds. Overall, it was a very good experiment. My hypothesis was not necessarily supported, as I did make it in a hopeful guise. And I learned a lot from this experiment overall of the pollination ecology in my area and how bees are so important to each and every plant in the world, really, but especially in urban environments where many other pollinators might be scared off. It's very interesting to look at the data here and be able to find a pattern that in the mornings the bees came earlier. I hope you all enjoyed this experiment and getting to look at the data and the results of a experiment conducted in a very urban environment, one where we most likely wouldn't see many different botanical research.